everyone, and welcome to Money Talk, a VCI wellness initiative. I'm Kathleen Karame, your host, and I'm here today with Rick Schultenover, who has spent the last 18 years as a certified financial planner. And Rick's here today to talk to us about alternative budgeting strategies. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me, Kathleen. We'll try to be pretty brief today. One of the most difficult challenges that people have in managing their finances is just having an effective budget. And so what we're going to go through today is an alternative strategy to help you manage your monthly take-home pay between paying fixed bills, having some fun, also planning for the future, and making sure that all the expenses that you anticipate or will have to pay in the future are covered as well. And so we'll hopefully keep this slideshow down to about 10 or 15 minutes max. And then Kathleen, if you want to ask any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me.
Great.
What we're looking at right now, in my experience in the last 18 years, is how most people typically come to my office managing their finances. And one of the first things that I ask people to do as we embark on a financial planning process is to get a better idea of what their budget looks like, where they spend their money on a day-to-day basis. And this is a good depiction of what that typically looks like for most families. Most folks operate on a 30-day budgeting cycle where they look at all the things that they have to spend money on over the course of a month, and they try to manage it over that 30-day cycle. I am going to advocate a little bit of a paradigm shift into that idea of managing money and encourage folks to look at more of a 7-day cycle. And as you can see on this current slideshow, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? There's one or two maybe income sources coming in to the main checking account. And then frequently there's a dozen or more expenses going out. And if you're not careful about where your money's going, or you're not paying attention on a somewhat regular basis, oftentimes there's more money going out than coming in, which, as we all know, usually ends up being a credit card balance at anywhere from 15 to 24% interest rate. We want to try to avoid that. So here's an alternative way of thinking about things. Try to imagine your monthly expenditures as 3 categories. The first one on the left is all the money that you have to spend. It's money that you've committed to, you've signed on the dotted line, so to speak, and you have to make that monthly payment every single month, no matter what. The middle bucket is more of a control bucket, and it's called the control bucket because you control exactly how much money you want to spend in each of these categories, and we'll go through some examples here on the next slide. But think of this as all the present lifestyle choices, all the things that you want to do, like going out with friends, vacations, gas, groceries, entertainment, that kind of stuff. Then the third bucket on the right is the dynamic bucket, and this is really the goal planning account. This is all the savings that you are putting money aside for, and the goals and future expenses could be money that you need 3 weeks from now, or it could be money that you need 3 years from now, all the way to retirement. So think of that third bucket as a multiple of many buckets with different time horizons and goals attached to each one. So here is an example of what might go into the static bucket. Again, it's all 30-day money. This is the bill account, basically. And what I usually encourage folks to do here is have one checking account. If you're married, maybe it's one joint checking account. And the only purpose for this checking account is to pay fixed bills. And so in a perfect world, this account will draw down to near zero every single month. And it's only being replenished with your direct deposits from your employer, your paycheck. And so this is things like your mortgage payment, car payments, possibly student loans, credit card payments, etc. Again, you're only allowing your fixed expenses to be drawn from this primary checking account. There's no spending for entertainment, no spending for gas and groceries, just fixed expenses that you get bills for every month. Now, this is the major paradigm shift for a lot of folks. And I've been using this system for several years, and I found it extremely helpful in helping me control how much money I spend on sort of the fun stuff. 7-day money, most people budget over 30 days. I actually budget over a 7-day period of time. And what I do is I design how much money I want to spend over the course of 7 days. And some weeks I spend a little bit more and some weeks I spend less. But in a perfect world, you don't go over your budget that you give yourself. And this is for things like gas and groceries, going out with your friends, personal care. As you can see, I don't have a lot of haircuts or anything like that, but whatever it is that you spend money on for personal stuff, everything in that camp is coming out of this 7-day bucket of money. And this could be a secondary checking account, or it could be just straight cash withdrawals that you take from the ATM, which most people frankly don't want to do because it's just another thing you have to do. Or it could be an envelope system. Some of you may have heard of a guy by the name of Dave Ramsey. He's a big envelopes fan, where you stash money into envelopes for each category that you want to spend on. And when the envelope is empty, you're done. That's a little extreme for me, but it's an idea that's out there. Some of you may have heard of it. The idea behind the 7-day bucket of money, however, this is the major paradigm shift, is that when the money's gone, what do you do? Kathleen, what do we do if we run out of money on Wednesday and you're not going to give yourself a paycheck?
We stop spending.
We stop spending. Most people just pull out Uncle Visa and then, tell themselves I'll deal with it later. And that's how we get into trouble. So if Wednesday rolls around and you're out of money, right, you've done everything that you have budgeted for, in a perfect world, you just stop spending. But the flip side is true as well. Thursday could roll around and you may have a $100 or a $200 surplus in your checking account, right? Well, now you have a free permission slip to spend that entire balance because tomorrow you're replenishing the money in that account again for the next 7 days. Or you may look at the week ahead and say, you know what, I've got a busy week next week. I'm going out 3 times with friends and I could use the extra cash so that I don't go over budget next week. And so you can let that money just roll to the next week, right? Or if you want to save it, we can start looking at the dynamic bucket. And this is all the things that you're going to need or want to spend money on longer than 30 days from now. And so think of this as your goal savings account. It could be setting money aside for Christmas and birthday gifts. Big one is vacations, home improvements. There was one year in my home where just about everything that could go wrong possibly went wrong. It was Murphy's Law to a T. I had a furnace go out. My washer and dryer went out. I had to repair some roof and exterior stuff to the house. It was like a $15,000 month. And if I didn't have an emergency fund set aside for things like home repairs and car repairs and stuff like that, it would have just gone on credit card. And so one of the things that you should have in your dynamic bucket is that emergency reserve. But you could also be looking at planning and saving for education for your kids or for yourself for that matter, retirement savings, right? Someday we're all going to have to retire or want to retire. So we want to plan for that. And you should be setting money aside for those specific goals. Okay. And then if there's maybe any special year-end gift giving or charities that you want to fund, usually it's pretty common right around Christmas time that people will do a lot of their year-end donations. That's another bucket you could create within this dynamic category. Make sense? So here's what it looks like in motion, okay? This is only dealing with take-home pay. So you have a paycheck. It gets directly deposited into your primary checking account. And from there, we will pay all of your fixed monthly bills, or you will pay your fixed monthly bills. I prefer to have all my stuff automated, automatically drafted, so I don't have to sit down and write checks. If you like to write checks, you can do that too, but the primary account only pays bills. If you set up your secondary account, I generally recommend on Fridays making those weekly transfers because most people spend their money over the weekends. The heaviest amount of spending happens on the weekends. And from there, you can either use a cash system or you can just use a debit card system so that when the money is gone, it's truly gone, as opposed to using credit card where any unpaid balances will roll over at high interest rates. And if you stay within your budget on a weekly basis, you are guaranteed to have money left over to fund your monthly and, your long-term savings goals, whatever they may be, whether it be retirement or education or vacations or what have you. And you can set this all up automatically. The only caveat here is that you want your static account and your control account to be at the same bank, right? If you're using two different banks, you may find that there's a 2 or 3 day business delay or business day delay when you're transferring funds. If you have the static account and the control account at the same bank, when you go to pay yourself your allowance, so to speak, every Friday, the money is instantly available. And I literally look at my account every Friday. I just go online on my phone, check my transfers and make sure they went through, and then I know how much money I have to work with for the next 7 days. So in a nutshell, that's it. We could go on for a lot longer and get deeper into some of these categories, but that's kind of the 30,000 foot view overview of how the cash flow system could work. And you don't need to buy anything to make this work. This is simply just a strategy that you can implement through your existing bank accounts.
Thank you so much, Rick. This was great. I do have a few follow-up questions if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
So the first question I have is, what percentage of your income should be applied into each of these 3 buckets?
Good question. That number can vary for each individual, but as the starting point and the general rule of thumb, what I'll suggest people do is try to limit their static account. And already made some commitments. You may not be able to get here right away, but it's something you can think about and work towards. But if you can limit your static account expenses or your fixed monthly bills to under 50% of your take-home pay, that's going to give you a lot of flexibility with the next 2 accounts. The control account, again, depending on how much you have in your static account, how many bills you have, your control account can range anywhere from 20 to 30% of take-home pay per week. And then the same thing for the savings accounts, the dynamic savings accounts, 20 to 30%. Your goals will dictate how much you put in each of these categories. Some people can get by on and prefer to have a lot less fixed expenses. For example, maybe they don't want a giant house. They got a smaller home, smaller mortgage payment that allows more money to go towards savings and spending on lifestyle expenses. But in a perfect world, if you're starting out saving for retirement, you're in your 20s or 30s, a good rule of thumb there is 10 to 15% should be going into retirement accounts. You might be doing a 401k and saving 5 or 6% there, so that means you should be trying to find another place to stick 10 or 15%, and that's where the dynamic account may come into play, where you're using things like Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, or what have you. So 50% or less in the static account, 20 to 30% going to each of the control and dynamic accounts is a good starting point. And depending on your goals, you can wiggle it around from there.
Excellent. And then in a follow-up question, in terms of debt management, what considerations would you say should be made when one is trying to determine how aggressively to pay off debt?
So there's not really good debts and bad debts. I'll call them friendly debts and unfriendly debts. And typically what I'll follow is a 7% rule. And that applies to the interest rate that you are being charged on the debt. And so any debts you have that carry 7% or higher interest rates, I'm usually suggesting people try to pay those down aggressively and as aggressively as possible. That's going to become part of your static account. Anytime there's debt reduction that we're working on diligently, we want to add any extra payments into that fixed bill account. And once the debt is gone, now you've just freed up that money. Let's say the debt's $500 a month that you're paying down aggressively. Once that credit card or whatever the debt is paid off, you've now just created an additional $500 that you can now choose to either spend on lifestyle stuff or you can allocate it towards future savings. Generally, also, if you have credit card debt, you probably don't have an emergency reserve. And so if you've eliminated credit card balances and you've funneled several $100s a month towards that activity or that goal, the first step after that is going to be to start funneling that cash flow now towards building up an emergency reserve so that you're not relying on credit cards when those unexpected things happen. But any debt reduction should go into that static account until it's paid off.
Excellent. Well, Rick, I sincerely want to thank you for joining us on Money Talks. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Kathleen. I appreciate it.